In this video, I'm going to be talking about training aids, why you have them, or at least why you should have them available. Now, training aids are extremely common in actual military service. You use a training aid when you do not have access to the real thing, or when you cannot include the real thing in your training because of safety reasons. Like you're training for IED patrols, you're not going to want to put out real IEDs, and if you miss it during the training, it goes off and actually kills someone. So you would use a simulated version of it, a training aid. Now first I'm showing you here 4 individual weapons that are training aids: an M16A1, an M16A2, an RPK, and an AK-47. 2 of those are actual military training aids that I purchased off the surplus market. The other 2 are civilian made ones that were meant for use in like museum displays, or they were trying to sell them to military units to supplement their available training items. The ones that are actual training aids are the M16A2 and the RPK. Those came from a Task C, Training Activity Support Command warehouse. Somewhere along the line they ended up in civilian hands and they ended up in the civilian market. We refer to them as rubber ducks because they're an extremely hard rubber material or a hard plastic material. There is metal inside them to help simulate the weight of the real thing and also make them more rigid and keep them from breaking. The M16A1 and the AK-47 are the museum type ones, the reproductions. They do have a piece of metal wire that goes through them to try to hold them together. They are made of a fiberglass type material. I know in our unit, our militia unit, we use rubber ducks a lot more than we do the real thing, just because there is training where we don't want to have a real weapon involved where someone could get injured, possibly shot because there was a round in the weapon that the person didn't know about or some other reason. Now, other items you'll see that can be used as training aids or that you may need depends on the job you're doing. First, I'll show you here an actual M72 law rocket tube. Now, this was fired at a range, so it is no longer usable. They are one-shot deals. Well, afterwards, someone took it, and then instead of turning it back in to be disposed of, they marked it as inert on both sides. And if you noticed in the destroying captured weapons video, they also drilled holes in the sides of the tube so it cannot be used again for any reason. I also have mines that I used to use for training newer soldiers. I have there an M15 heavy anti-tank mine, an OZM-3 anti-personnel mine, a bounding fragmentation, and an M14. I would use those when training new troops, if it was a US mine, to train them on the procedures for emplacement and removal. If it was a foreign mine, I would use them for recognition and also for destruction training for when we were practicing for demining operations. Now below that, first off on the left here, that black ammo can was full of blanks for the M249 squad automatic weapon. It's one that I found laying in a Connex that had never gotten turned in after a training exercise. Well, I would use that as a training item for troops when we were doing like mount operations training, military operations in urban terrain or urban warfare. Have them put that on their saw so that they had to maneuver with a saw that had a drum on it. It's a lot more difficult when you're trying to move through hallways, move through bushes and stuff. To the right there is your typical dummy grenade. That is the current style of fragmentation grenade used by the US military. Next to that is another museum type weapon made of the same material as the AK-47 there. That one I got from the same company. It is a M18HC, a high concentration white smoke grenade simulator. It's just a dummy. It will not actually go off or anything. It will not emit smoke. I had that for identification training, and I would use that by carrying it with me for simulating the weight on my gear during patrolling exercises. Going down here and over, we have some training aids that I had to make myself. That blue cord there is training detonating cord, or det cord. When we were lucky enough to get a hold of it, we would get issued it in like 1,000-foot spools or 1,000-yard spools, and then we would cut off the length we needed for whatever training aid we were making for that exercise. Down at the bottom here, zoom in a little bit, I have two simulated explosive blocks. Both of them I made myself. The top one is a simulated 1-pound TNT charge, and below that is a simulated 1 1/4 pound stick of C4. Both of them are made to the dimensions of the real thing. So when you make it yourself, you try to copy the dimensions of the real thing so that you get used to handling items that are the correct weight and correct size. Now, using those basic materials, we also have here some other items. Off on the right there, that stake mine, I made that to simulate a POMS Z stake mine, a Russian made fragmentation mine. It's essentially a hand grenade on a stick. It does not look exactly like the real thing. It is not the exact size of the real thing, but in training it worked. You could put those out on trails when you're doing patrolling exercise, so the troops had to look for tripwires, and when they found a tripwire, they had to go through their procedures of identifying what's the tripwire connected to, and then determine what should be done. Directly to the left of it is a simulated pipe bomb made out of PVC pipe. Get closer here. With the simulated fuse on top. You had the casing, simulated fragmentation material that I glued onto there so it wouldn't fall off. And I marked it as inert so that no one would confuse it. Next to it here, a simulated homemade satchel charge using some of the homemade C4 blocks and some det cord and some other items put together the same way that you would the real thing for use for training. Up here we have a simulated grape shot charge. Grape shot charges are homemade claymores when you do not have access to the real thing or you need more of them. As you see there, simulated det cord, a number 10 can, and then I have a cover across the front. Now I will give one warning on training aids. When Obama was in the White House, there were a lot of raids on patriots and militiamen and preppers. Ones that had training aids, well, when they did their big layout to display on how they caught this evil terrorist, they would lay out the training aids with the real things, and they would not say that those are training aids. So you would look at this big display of weaponry and you would see, you know, fragmentation grenades. Well, they're dummy grenades, but they wouldn't show you the bottoms to see that there's nothing there. Oh, they had machine guns. Well, it was probably a rubber duck and not the real thing. Oh, they had landmines. Well, civilians would not know if it's blue like that. It's a training aid, it's not the real thing. So just be advised that when you have training aids, there is always the possibility that someday, you know, when they do the big PR event, you know, if you get arrested, they'll lay it out and make you look like you're Carlos the Jackal. For those of you who don't know who that is, that was a very infamous terrorist back in the 70s and 80s. Back during what could be considered the golden age of terrorism, is my guess. Should you have training aids for use in your unit? Definitely. You should have some on hand to enhance the training that you are conducting in your unit, so that you're getting used to placing out the real thing, or what your reactions would be if you came across the real thing on the battlefield. Now, if you make your own training aids, I highly suggest you paint them blue. Blue is the accepted color for training items. It used to be black, now it's blue. And you mark them as inert, like was done with that anti-tank rocket, and like what I did with that pipe bomb simulator. You don't want someone to freak out and think it's the real thing, especially if it's law enforcement who happens to show up at your training. He sees, you know, a potential IED. Well, you don't want him flipping out thinking it's an actual terrorist explosive device. You want it clearly marked that it is a training aid. These are just some examples. This is not all inclusive. I have far more training aids than this. I also have claymore sets and other types of mines and so forth, and other demolitions items. I just don't have them laid out here. This is just an example of the types of things that are available out there that you can get a hold of or make to supplement what you have for real during training. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.